I was placed up for adoption as a child due to my gender. After a 20-year period, my adoptive parents contacted me, requesting financial assistance for my sister's education. I am currently 25 years of age. My experiences can be traced back to my early childhood, at the age of 6. In fact, my story begins at the time of my birth, as I am the third and youngest child of my parents. Despite not being wealthy, my parents managed to maintain a comfortable standard of living. The family was able to allocate sufficient resources to raise 3 children. They resided in a modest town in an ancestral house, which reduced their overall expenses. The grandparents owned a farm that provided a considerable portion of their kitchen needs. The father was employed as a truck driver and returned home every 3 to 4 days. The mother worked as a waitress. The parents already had 2 daughters when they conceived a third. I was the unplanned child, and the sentiments of the parents when an unplanned child is born are evident. I was unaware of these sentiments as a child, but as I matured, I began to comprehend them. It was distressing to realize that I was unwanted, that my parents sought to discard me. However, the doctor my parents were advised against having another child due to the potential for significant health concerns for my mother. My mother, in particular, expressed a strong preference for a daughter. Her rationale was straightforward: she hoped to avoid the expense of purchasing new clothes for me by using the discarded garments of my older siblings. My 2 older sisters had a 1-year age gap, which afforded them the opportunity to wear each other's clothes interchangeably. My parents had purchased clothes of similar sizes, which they could interchange. This was a source of enjoyment for them. However, when I was born as a male, my parents were disappointed. They expressed hatred towards me. They dressed me in female attire and even sent me to school with my sister's discarded uniform. As a child, I found this embarrassing. I was very small at the time. I still have a blurred memory of how I was bullied for wearing a girl's uniform and long hair. If I complained about it, I was met with a thrashing from my mother. I grew up hearing nothing but abuse and harsh words from my parents, the majority of which I did not understand at the time. When I did begin to understand them, I hated my parents. My father was, on the whole, a more favorable parental figure than my mother. However, he was frequently absent, and on occasions, his behavior was erratic. On some days, I perceived him to be impartial between my sisters and me, yet on others, his conduct was as malevolent as my mother's, if not more so. I would not describe myself as a model child. As I began to comprehend their biases towards me, I rebelled. My sisters consistently received the most desirable items, while I was relegated to their discarded remnants. Consequently, I began exhibiting malevolent behavior towards them, attributing their actions as the primary cause of my distress. I was occasionally disciplined for my actions, including prolonged periods of grounding. I was responsible for preparing my own meals, and on numerous occasions, I was deprived of dinner. I was also unable to comprehend the requests of a 6-year-old child. I am currently 18 years of age. As a child, I recall one particularly salient incident that I believe was a pivotal moment in my life. I am uncertain as to the exact date, but I was being subjected to severe bullying at school for my attire, which was in accordance with my gender identity. Upon returning home, I discovered that my mother had procured new garments for my siblings for the holidays and proceeded to cut them into pieces with scissors. I recognize that my actions were malevolent and that I am not proud of what I did. However, I was suffering from mistreatment at the hands of my parents, and my actions stemmed from a place of pain rather than malevolence. In an effort to comprehend my distress, my parents regarded my actions as a transgression deserving of the most severe penalty. They initiated the process of my adoption, but after a month, there were no prospective adoptive families. This resulted in a further expression of their displeasure. I was consistently informed that I was worthless and that I was an unwelcome presence in their lives. On occasion, I overheard my mother expressing regret over my gender. She believed that had she known I was a girl, she would have chosen to terminate the pregnancy. This knowledge continues to haunt me, as it suggests that my parents harbor deep-seated animosity towards me, fueled by reasons that are not within my control. The subject began discussing the matter with their friends and relatives. The father had known an individual in the neighboring town who operated a food van with his spouse. Despite their relatively limited financial resources, they aspired to have a child. They were in their late 30s and had been trying to conceive for over a decade, yet they remained unsuccessful. The father approached them and they readily consented to adopt the subject. The subject recalls the moment when the father informed the mother and sisters of the decision. They were pleased and elated at the prospect of becoming parents. The father also issued a disclaimer, noting the financial constraints and the possibility of the subject's inability to attend school. The mother expressed disbelief. My eyes widened, and I replied, "Who cares? Just drop in there tomorrow." I stood there at the corner, holding the curtain, rendered motionless by a combination of shock, sadness, and fear. Despite my hatred for my family, I was overwhelmed with a sense of loss and pain at the prospect of leaving them. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I did not cry out loud. They were so happy, basking in the moment, that they did not notice my presence. I had forgotten that I was there when my father saw me in tears. He approached me, rubbed my back, and said, "Pack your belongings. We will leave for your new family tomorrow morning." I cried out loudly when he said this, but I realized that he was speaking to someone who was not listening, so I went to my room, packed my belongings, and prayed that the following day, my father drove me to the neighboring town. I am unsure of the exact emotions I was experiencing at the time, but I was not crying. Perhaps I was simply numb. As I left the house and throughout the drive, I observed that my new family was indeed impoverished. They resided in a modest house with a single room that they had renovated into my sleeping quarters. I did not express any objections because they had made an effort to provide me with a room. I had never had my own room or a bed. My sisters had a bed, and I was placed on a cot in the corner of their room, situated in a small closet for my belongings. The room was comparatively smaller than our room, but it was cozy. My new parents, Mary and John, were warm and loving, but I had previously experienced a disturbed household. I had never before experienced that level of love. I observed my parents showering their love on my sisters but never on me. I used to doubt my new parents' intentions and believed their love to be temporary. I attempted to avoid becoming attached to them because I feared that they might also abandon me. Childhood trauma. It took me many months to realize that they actually loved me and were not putting on a facade. My parents discontinued my education that year because they relocated during the academic session. However, my new parents promised to facilitate my enrollment in school the following year. I observed their dedication to securing financial resources for my education, which led to my rekindling of affection for them. My adoption proved to be a fortuitous turn of events. After being sent to Mary and John, my biological parents failed to fulfill their obligations. I was grateful for the opportunity to be raised by my adoptive parents, who exemplified diligence and hard work. They labored for 14 to 16 hours daily to provide for themselves and me. The food truck was situated in close proximity to their apartment, ensuring that I was not left alone when they were working. I could observe them through my bedroom window. Over time, I began spending my days on the truck, assisting them with various tasks. Upon my admission to school, I dedicated myself to my studies but also helped with household chores whenever I had free time. I was approximately 10 years old when I assisted Johan at the cash counter and quickly developed proficiency in calculations. I gained an early understanding of business and accounting. After completing high school, I aspired to assume control of their business. Despite my desire to assume responsibility for the food truck, my parents insisted that I complete my college education first. They funded my education with their savings, as they were no longer able to run the food truck due to their advancing age and declining strength. My parents assured me that they could manage for a few more years, and they encouraged me to pursue my studies in business and accounting at the university level. My ultimate aspiration was to become an entrepreneur. My graduation day was the happiest day of my life. John and Mary were overjoyed and even requested that my biological parents attend the convocation. However, they did not attend after college. I desired to operate the food van and allow Mary and John to retire. However, they had planned something else for me. They had accumulated significant savings. He then transferred ownership of the funds to me. I was deeply moved by his generosity. He informed me that they could manage independently for several more years, but they were reluctant to involve me in their plans. He provided me with the financial resources to establish my own business. I was determined not to squander his investment, so I leveraged my business expertise to identify a small, local enterprise in a favorable location that was facing challenges. I proposed a profit-sharing lease agreement with the owner, but was initially rejected several times. Undeterred, I renovated the premises and menu to align with the preferences of millennials and young adults, and provided exemplary customer service. This strategy proved successful, with sales increasing exponentially within a year, resulting in a twofold return on the initial investment. 4 years later, I have expanded the business to include 3 cafes in the town, which continue to flourish. I currently operate 3 cafes in the town, which are all performing well. I upgraded Mary and John to a more suitable apartment, and I have acquired a smaller residence of my own. I had been living with them until recently, but I encouraged them to sell their food truck and enjoy their retirement. However, they were insistent on continuing the business for their own satisfaction. When I left the house with my suitcase, I could not have imagined that I would become a successful entrepreneur. Despite having obtained a college degree, I am currently engaged in the operation of multiple restaurant chains within the same town. Fast forwarding to the previous month, I recall that it was a typical day at work. I was occupied at the cash register of one of the restaurants when I observed a familiar individual. I was struck by the peculiar sensation of seeing a ghost. It was none other than my biological father. It had been nearly 2 decades since we had last met. He appeared pale and weak, yet he walked with a broad smile. Across the counter, I embraced him. Given the presence of customers in the store, I did not speak and instead led him to the corner. His appearance evoked memories of my childhood, which I had not thought to revisit in such detail had he not reappeared in my life. He expressed pride in my success and happiness. I was at a loss for words. I was rendered speechless. He stated that he was passing by and encountered John, who informed him about my thriving enterprise. He asserted that he would contact my mother over the weekend. I remained silent, and he subsequently departed. After concluding my day, I sought out John and informed him that I was reluctant to meet my biological parents, who had disowned me for being a male child. They were aware of the distressing childhood experiences I endured led me to seek solace in the idea of running away and hiding. However, Mary urged me to forgive my parents and move on. I agreed to meet them on the condition that Mary and John should be present with me. My biological parents arrived at John's house, and I anticipated that they would express remorse for their actions. However, they exhibited no such sentiments. They enumerated the benefits they had conferred upon me. My mother suggested that I should be grateful to them for providing such exemplary parents who had nurtured me to become a successful individual. I was taken aback to hear this, and I wanted to reciprocate, but Mary restrained me and urged me to calm down. I replied that I was indeed fortunate to have John and Mary as my parents. I could describe that the following day, I received a call from my mother. I was unable to recognize her voice. It was the first time she had called me in 2 decades. She demanded money. She informed me that my father had lost his regular job and had been working on a contractual basis for years. She also stated that she had lost her job because no restaurant requires a 50-year-old. The elderly waitress indicated that it was challenging for her to fulfill her financial obligations. When I inquired about the amount she required, she stated that $20,000 would be sufficient. She had borrowed this sum from her acquaintances over the previous few months to cover the costs of groceries at her residence. However, she was now facing demands for repayment from these same individuals, and she lacked the necessary resources to do so. I terminated the call, stating that I would consider the matter further and contact her at a later time. I harbor a deep animosity towards them. I feel a sense of guilt that they are being pursued for financial assistance. At times, I perceive her actions as exploitative. However, it is also possible that they are genuinely in need of help. I would still feel remorse for allowing them to endure the embarrassment, even though I possessed the necessary funds. I am grateful for the feedback and positive sentiments expressed in response to my initial post. However, I have received a range of reactions regarding my decision to provide assistance to my mother with $20. I then discussed the matter with Mary and John. Mary was pleased that I was considering assisting my parents, but she also advised me to be cautious. John said it was my money, so I should make the decision. He also expressed concern that they might be attempting to exploit my emotions after giving it considerable thought. I agreed to take this first and last wager on my biological parents. I proceeded to transfer the funds to her account. While I felt a sense of satisfaction in being able to assist my family, despite their past mistreatment, I was ultimately misguided. Perhaps a more accurate assessment would be that I was partially correct, as I had anticipated that they might attempt to exploit me financially. Indeed, within a week of sending the money, my mother called me again. I responded with a complex emotional state, expressing gratitude for the assistance while simultaneously anticipating her ulterior motives. She then informed me that my sisters wished to meet with me. When might I be available to do so? I was overcome with a sense of longing to be reconciled with my family. I was aware that my parents had wronged me during my childhood, and I harbored resentment towards them. However, I never held the same animosity towards my sister. In my younger years, I may have engaged in mischievous behavior towards them, but as I matured, I ceased to hold them responsible for my circumstances. At times, I even attributed their actions to external factors. My parents terminated my relationship with them because of financial constraints, not because of any malevolence on their part. I informed my mother that we could meet on the following Sunday, and that I could drive home. She interjected, suggesting that we meet in a different location. I did not give this suggestion much thought and simply replied, "Okay." She stated that she would text the location and time details at a later time. After we ended the call, I experienced a sense of unease, as though something was amiss. She was reluctant for me to visit my family home. While the location was not of primary importance, it was nevertheless customary to meet with family at their residence rather than at a restaurant. Nevertheless, she sent me the details of the restaurant, which was one of the most expensive in town. At the time, I did not think much about it because my mind was preoccupied with other matters. The fact that they did not invite me to their home was a source of considerable disappointment. I proceeded to the restaurant, where I found my sisters waiting for me. They rushed to hug me, and I was happy to see them after so many years. We spent some time catching up with each other until the menu arrived. At that point, they began ordering the most expensive food. When my father was asked what he wanted, he simply grinned. He advised me to order the most expensive item on the menu. I found this to be a petty comment, particularly given that I am now an adult. Had my biological parents made a similar suggestion, I would have been proud of them. However, coming from my parents, it was hurtful and unkind. I sat there watching them enjoy the food, and I felt a sense of powerlessness. I paid the bill, and I was consumed by a range of intense emotions. I considered simply leaving before the bill arrived, but that would have been an excessive response. Instead, I resolved never to become emotionally entangled with them again. I was detached and aloof for the remainder of the evening, and I suspect they were unaware of my disinterest. My elder sister, M., inquired about our next dining destination. I feigned enthusiasm and replied, "Not tonight," before departing. Upon returning, I informed Mary about my family's avaricious tendencies. She was taken aback, noting that she is a benevolent and self-sufficient woman. She advised me to refrain from acting foolishly and to avoid dwelling on the situation. She encouraged me to focus on my own life. My sisters contacted me after approximately a week, but I did not respond. My mother also reached out, but I did not reply. It has been 2 months since I ceased responding to their communications. I believe they have taken my lack of response to indicate that I no longer wish to engage with them. Update 2: I observed the telephone ringing and responded to it without prior planning. She commenced with small talk, inquiring about me and my occupation. The tone was so insincere and ostentatious that I found it unbearable. I inquired as to her intentions. She took a deep breath and stated that my sisters had to withdraw from college due to their inability to pay the tuition fees, and thus, they were requesting financial assistance from me for their college education. I became enraged. She then she urged me to remain calm and asserted that my sisters were my family. She further stated that I should assist them financially. I was at work at the time and did not wish to become distressed, so I terminated the call. She subsequently called me again in the evening. I ignored the call several times, but it continued to trouble me. I realized that ignoring the call was not a viable solution. The next time she called, I answered. She inquired as to whether my sisters were pleased to be rejoining their college. I must inquire as to the manner in which we shall proceed. Will you be paying in a lump sum or on a semester-by-semester basis? I propose that you transfer the entire amount to me, and that I pay the tuition before each semester. You need not concern yourself with the details. I was taken aback by this suggestion. I am not going to make any payments, I replied. The caller was taken aback by my response. She had not anticipated such an answer. She then asked, "What do you mean you don't want to pay it? It is acceptable to make payments in installments. I have stated on numerous occasions that I am not willing to pay the entire amount in one lump sum. My elder sister's education is not my responsibility, particularly given that my parents have not provided any support or guidance throughout my life. You are only engaging with me because you believe I can provide financial assistance. I will not be manipulated or exploited by anyone. We are the ones who birthed you, and whatever you are is a direct result of that. Your father found a suitable guardian for you, and now that it is your time to repay us, you are avoiding your responsibilities. Your sisters and your parents are your responsibilities, and you are expected to take care of all of us." I had a lot to say, but it was falling on deaf ears, so I simply acknowledged that I do owe a great deal. To my parents, John and Mary, they are deserving of all the credit for my success. As for you, I am unaware of your identities. None of my documents include your names, and I do not possess any photographs of you. Therefore, I am unfamiliar with you. She was hurling insults at me, but I informed her that she had reached the wrong number and hung up. Regardless of how you may perceive me, I am not going to be selfish or cruel. I have earned money on my own. I contacted my biological family, who were never my actual family. I was removed from their care when I was just 6 years old. In my last updates, I referred to John and Mary by their names, not Mom and Dad. In fact, I did call them Mom and Dad, not immediately after coming to them. However, after they took me to school and worked hard to provide for my needs and loved me, I became attached to them and called them Mom and Dad. In order to provide a clear narrative, I have referred to them by their names. It should be noted that John and Mary are my actual parents, whereas my biological parents are not a part of my life. I will now proceed to the next story. Story 2. I discovered that my wife had been unfaithful to me with her app, which she had met at a convention. Consequently, I exposed both of them. My wife and I got married approximately 5 years ago. We hit it off very well from the outset. We always enjoyed engaging in activities that could be perceived as nerdy. She and I were both avid gamers, with a shared interest in anime and other forms of nerd culture. She held a special place in my life, and I considered her to be an integral part of my social circle. We developed a strong bond and a deep connection that I felt was unbreakable. In fact, I met her at a convention, where we immediately hit it off. I recall thinking that we were destined to be together. We began discussing our mutual love for Legend of Zelda and other similar interests. From The Legend of Zelda to even discussing the latest One Piece chapter, some people look for the one they're playing to be everything. That was her. We got married a little fast and had this really nerdy wedding where we even encouraged people to dress up. However, we didn't get a chance to go to conventions due to our jobs and how much they cost. We rarely had a chance to do so. However, I wanted to make our 5-year anniversary special. Despite my limited financial resources, I was able to provide for her basic needs. To commemorate our 5th anniversary, I procured tickets to a prominent comic convention, which she greatly anticipated. Her enthusiasm was palpable, and I was eager to attend. I must acknowledge that I have historically struggled with romantic relationships. I often failed to discern when a woman was genuinely interested in me. This realization dawned only after my marriage, even though I had previously experienced similar sentiments. She expressed interest in getting to know me better at the convention. Our interactions were positive. A woman dressed as slave Princess Leia expressed admiration for my stormtrooper costume, which I had put together at the last minute after she left. My wife pulled me aside to discuss the woman's behavior. I informed her that I was unaware of her interest. I lacked the ability to read social cues and was unaware of her attraction to me. My wife was somewhat frustrated, but we continued with our day. The day's events led to an unexpected development. We had attended a meetup event, where we encountered a man dressed as Han Solo. My wife, who was also attired as Princess Leia, initiated a conversation with him. The two of them engaged in a lengthy discussion, gradually becoming more intimate. I intervened and informed the man that I was his acquaintance. The man acknowledged our interaction but declined to pursue it further. After he departed, I made eye contact with my wife. She informed me that there was no romantic interest and that he was simply a pleasant individual who admired her attire. Given her greater familiarity with the Star Wars franchise, she was eager to discuss the encounter. I chose to disregard the incident, deeming it inconsequential. The following day, my wife awoke with symptoms of illness and fatigue. I offered to accompany her, suggesting that I could provide support and assistance. I departed, intending to return later. However, I was unable to dismiss the events of the previous night. I attributed this to my own imagination, but my wife was unresponsive to my messages. We still had one more day before the conclusion of the convention. I purchased a gift for her. When I approached the room, I heard sounds of moaning and other incoherent noises were audible. I initially dismissed these sounds as possibly emanating from my wife. However, upon opening the door, I observed her standing there, looking at me. It was evident that she had been engaged in some form of activity. I confronted her, but she denied any wrongdoing. I conducted a thorough search for witnesses but found no one. I chose to disregard the incident. The convention proceeded, and my wife gradually became more distant. She began working longer hours, which further contributed to the distance between us. She was working longer hours and returning home exhausted. I suggested watching a movie together, but she informed me that she was busy. I was unable to dismiss the moans that I had heard while my wife showered. I observed that her Discord notifications were turned off. She never turned these off during the duration of our relationship, so something was amiss. I was surprised to find that the passcode was the same, and I began to read the messages. They were from a man that she had met at the Star Wars meetup. He repeatedly flirted with her and they exchanged pictures. He even mentioned that he wanted to roleplay with her, and she was enthusiastic about the idea. I was angry and set the phone down, pretending that I had not seen anything. My wife inquired about my well-being, and I provided a false response, stating that everything was fine. However, I was not in a satisfactory emotional state. I conducted research on the legal procedures for obtaining a divorce, which I believed would be challenging to pursue. Nevertheless, I was driven by a desire to humiliate my wife and demonstrate to her that I was aware of her infidelity. I informed her that I would not be attending another convention, but her eyes displayed a slight glow of excitement, despite the fact that we would not be together. This was my partner, someone I had always wanted to be with forever, who had just discarded me. It was a devastating blow, but I was determined not to let her in on my plan on the day of the convention. I conducted further research on this individual and discovered that they had been working closely together. I proceeded to the convention and discovered them, naturally, in close proximity to her preferred voice actors. At this juncture, I implemented my strategic plan. I observed them as they proceeded in line and positioned myself behind them. I concealed my identity with a mask, yet I closely monitored their interactions as they drew nearer. The voice actor inquired about her well-being, and she embraced him more closely and replied that she was experiencing a certain level of distress. The couple shared a kiss, which prompted me to implement my plan. I positioned myself between them, removed my mask, and gazed directly at my wife. She lowered her hand and looked at me. She inquired about my intentions. I engaged in a verbal altercation, asserting that I had caught her with the other man and that he had been unfaithful to me. She denied the allegations. I obtained the Discord messages and presented them for all to see. The other attendees were visibly shocked that I would even consider such an action. However, I was determined to pursue this matter. I informed the group that my wife had been unfaithful and that she had engaged in an affair with this individual, whom she had also met at a convention. He then stood up and stated that he required a brief respite, after which he departed. My wife's eyes became filled with tears, and she implored me to consider her words. However, I was unable to do so. I informed her that she had lied to me, stating that she was going to the event alone. I also revealed that I was aware of her meetings with this individual, as well as her late-night office visits and gaming sessions with colleagues. I had contacted them on one occasion to inquire about these activities. They stated that they were unaware of any gaming night since they were occupied with preparations for the holidays. My wife stood there, visibly embarrassed. She informed me that she desired an open relationship and had considered inquiring about it. I informed her that I was not interested in hearing this. She was also upset that I had intervened in such a manner. However, I was certain that this was the appropriate course of action. She had made a mistake. Upon returning home, I gathered my belongings and proceeded to stay at a hotel. I gathered all of my belongings and contacted an attorney to prepare the necessary paperwork for filing. She attempted to persuade me to remain and suggested that we adopt an open relationship. She proposed that I engage in sexual relations with other women and that she could do the same. I had never desired such a relationship, only wanted my wife. She was my lover as well as my partner, my entire world. My actions led to someone recording me and posting the recording on social media, which caused significant distress to my wife. I proceeded with the divorce and was awarded the house and all our belongings. However, I later sold the house because I did not wish to be reminded of the painful memories associated with that period of my life. My wife and I had a shared history. I was unaware of the extent of her involvement in the nerd scene, which became a topic of significant discussion on Twitter and other online platforms. Her employer eventually became aware of her activities due to the visibility of these discussions. I am uncertain if she remained in the relationship or not. Regardless, I am pursuing a new romantic interest. However, I will not consider a woman who has been unfaithful to me.